When you look at a Freemasonry organization, it has adepts at the top, and it starts at a third degree York Rite, the old mystical system, versus the Scottish Rite, which is 33rd degree. And everybody else below is just sort of camouflage. And they don't know the true secrets. They don't get told the true allegories. And their goal is to bring in the end time and to wipe humankind from the face of the earth so that we don't reach our destiny to be raised up to be like angels. You know, the handshakes that Freemasons have comes from the Essenes.
Oh, wow.
It may be slightly variant, but it's rooted, and they take that history back to their relationship with the Essenes through the Knights Templars. And so it's a long sort of history. Essenes are the first Western branch of the ascetic monasteries of Hinduism. The Kabbalist is a sister branch of the Essenes, but from the Eastern mysticism that's begat by Nimrod and the Magi after Babel, versus the Egyptian mysticism that comes with Ham and Hermes to Egypt. Then you have some other groups that are in the Middle East operating with the Essenes and the Kabbalists, which are like the Sabians and the Mendeans, and they are all different sects of this Judaic mysticism at that time. And Josephus writes about the Essenes. He understood them, and he wrote about their belief systems, their very ascetic lifestyle. But the important thing that he wrote about is who they worshipped. And they worshiped fallen angels. And they would not give up the names of those angels even upon death and torture. And that's where they say they received most of their knowledge from. So if they're responsible for writing some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, those are not monotheist doctrines.
Those clips you just heard were from my latest interview with Gary Wayne, the world's leading Christian expert on all things related to secret societies and their hidden agendas. The reason I reached out to him is because I finally decided that it was time to get to the bottom of the Book of Enoch, specifically First Enoch. It seems like more YouTube channels and influencers are promoting this specific book like never before, claiming that it should be accepted with maybe the same authority as the Book of Genesis or the Book of Isaiah, and people are extremely confused about what the Book of Enoch is and what it isn't. In my investigation to understand what this book is really all about, I made some very alarming connections, things that Gary and I will explore together in this video. But first, I need to provide much needed context. The book of First Enoch is actually made up of 5 different books that were originally separate manuscripts. These books all use the name of Enoch as a pseudonym and are dated to different periods in history with different unknown authors. None of the books predate the 3rd century BC, and what's even more interesting is that these books provide one of the most important source texts of Jewish mysticism. Chief among the Jewish mystical groups that cherished the 5 books of First Enoch was the Essenes, who lived in Palestine from about 200 BC to about 100 AD. Their headquarters was none other than the Qumran Caves, the same place where the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery was made in the late 1940s. Now, here's the key point you need to understand. A complete book of First Enoch was not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Only 11 Aramaic language fragments were found, and no fragments of the Book of Parables were found at all. This begs the question: how is it that we now have a complete book of First Enoch available in English as well as other languages? Well, here's what Australian theologian and textual critic Philip Esler explains in his article, Taking First Enoch Seriously. Though the Book of Enoch was originally written in Aramaic, it was translated into Greek around the turn of the first millennium and then translated from Greek into Ge'ez, or Ethiopic, in northern Ethiopia between the 4th and 6th centuries CE. He goes on to say that at some stage in ancient times, the Aramaic version disappeared entirely, and then so did most of the Greek, with exception of some useful chunks of the Book of the Watchers quoted by a Greek writer in the 9th century CE. The Ge'ez version, containing the full text of First Enoch, remained essentially unknown in the West until copies of it were brought to Europe in the 1770s by the Scottish explorer James Bruce. Now, if you are not familiar with James Bruce of Kinnaird, he was a documented Freemason who was initiated in Lodge Canongate Kilwinning No. 2 on the 1st of August, 1753. He was referred to in the lodge's records as the Abyssinian Traveler, which, in case you didn't know, Abyssinia was the historical name for the Ethiopian Empire. Of course, 20 years after he was initiated as a Mason, James Bruce brought 3 copies of the Book of 1st Enoch back to Europe. This is exactly why I reached out to Gary Wayne. If you're not familiar with his work, he has successfully mapped out the entire family tree of the secret societies. He has outlined the entire organizational structure from the top down in what he refers to as the thelemic tree of the mystery schools and Luciferians. So, if you want to know why the Freemasons were so interested in acquiring 1st Enoch from Ethiopia and exactly how the Essenes are connected into this whole picture, I invite you to listen to this conversation with an open mind. Many of the so-called truther and conspiratorial-minded influencers out there are afraid of the information in this video, and they have been ignoring key facts about both the Essenes and the Freemasons that connect directly to the Book of 1st Enoch because they are financially motivated to sell you some sort of audio or video commentary on the Book of Enoch, or maybe a physical copy of the book with their own translation or notes inside of it. So it's time to get to the bottom of this Enoch rabbit hole. So let's get into this one, and don't forget to drop a like and share this video. Remember to subscribe because this video is the first part of my deeper investigation into 1st Enoch, and you won't want to miss part 2 coming up. All right, welcome back to Overcome Babylon. I'm your brother Abraham, as always. Today I have a very special guest, Gary Wayne, Christian contrarian and avid researcher who has uncovered biblical prophecy together with history and mythology in what I would say a very unprecedented way. His extensive study encompasses the Bible, Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, and many other ancient epics and secret society publications. Gary Wayne is the author of 2 books, one of which I have here, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and that's book 1, and then he wrote book 2. His 45 years of research will blow you away. And I should honestly be referring to him as Dr. Gary Wayne. His work is well deserving of at least 1 honorary doctorate. Genesis 6 Conspiracy in particular, book 1, is 800 pages of some of the most well-documented history on exposing secret society theology that you will possibly read. And I've read other books like Walter Martin's Kingdom of the Cults or Kingdom of the Occult and others. I gotta say, nothing comes close. So, welcome, Brother Gary. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for inviting me to your show, and happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. So, the reason I reached out to you, Brother Gary, is because I'm trying to understand the Qumran caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and the Jewish Essenes, who scholars say had their headquarters at Qumran. As you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. It's had tremendous influence on the theology of Christians to this day, including widespread adoption of books like 1st Enoch, fragments of which were found at the caves. So this archaeological site is situated along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, believed to have been the dwelling place of an Essene community, if not the headquarters. So people say things like, oh, we need to carefully investigate everything in the Qumran caves for the specific purpose of better understanding the theology of the Essenes. The idea goes on to be something like this. The Essenes had good doctrine. They were God-fearing. And John the Baptist was possibly an Essene himself because he lived in the wilderness and had a similar lifestyle. So here's my question to kick this one off, Brother Gary. In all your study of the mystery schools, secret societies, and antediluvian mysticism, Who would you say that the Essenes really are?
Well, I will tell you what they say they were and how groups that include them in their organizations and their history say. And they are part of the mystery schools, if we want to look at it from that sort of perspective, as an extension out of the Egyptian mystery schools, and specifically the therapeutate. And that's why therapeutics is a significant part of the Essene way of life. And they were known for collecting medicines and herbs and trying to nurse people back to health. But that is a branch of the Egyptian mysteries. They were polytheist. And what they said was, and in book one, I cover off what all of the polytheist organizations, whether it's Freemasonry, Gnostics, Templar type organizations, all the ones that would associate themselves with the Essenes, including, the handshakes that Freemasons have comes from the Essenes.
Oh, wow.
It may be slightly variant, but it's rooted, and they take that history back to their relationship with the Essenes through the Knights Templars. And so it's a long sort of history. And so when they look at how their religion works, they believe that they received the true religion of Moses, which is, so most people would, if somebody you heard them say that, you'd say, okay, great, they're monotheist. Well, that's not what they say. They say that the true religion was the religion of Egypt that Moses brought with him. And the religion went rogue in the time of the monarchy to create a bigger mythos for the kings. So they say that, and this part is true, Moses would have been raised up in the royal family, educated at Heliopolis, become an adept before he was even 18. So he was a high level adept, swore the oaths and everything that is involved within the mystical religions. And he was there for a purpose. I mean, God wanted him to understand what he was going up against, a beast empire, to free the people of Israel. So God wanted him fully conversant with the enemy and be able to speak their language in a way that nobody else could.
That's
Which is also,
that's a very unique perspective. I love it. Keep going, Gary.
it is, and it also answers a question just down a quick sort of rabbit hole as to why Satan was there to claim the body of Moses when he died, and God sent Michael in the book of Jude to prevent that, because legally Satan had title over Moses's body for the oaths that he swore, because God holds everybody accountable for the oaths, right? But God had him there for a reason, and he trumped all of that because of his, in favor of his servants. So when we look at then this religion that comes from Egypt, that hits monotheism at the Islamic level, at the Judaic level, at the Christian level. So it's a terrific sort of intercession. And so this is the religion that goes rogue, and the Essenes believe that they have the true religion of the Judean society that Jesus grew up into. And so one of the greatest accounts of the Essenes, you get, and when I decided I would include all of the accounts in book one about what the polytheists and the Gnostics say about the Essenes and draft them as one of their sort of famous honor roll of organizations and groups of people, is I wanted to have a Christian sort of basis. So, and I sent you a document that I had already done so that I was comfortable if I ever got challenged.
I have it all here. It's all marked up. It's all underlined and highlighted. Yeah. Go ahead, Brother Gary.
And I think it was Pliny. And again, I put all of these quotes in these documents that I have for Christians who want to get more information on it.
Right. By the way, is this unpublished? You haven't published this information?
No, just it's just for my reference, so I have it because I like to back up everything that I do, is that they say that the religion is thousands of years old, which is historically inaccurate. And that's what Pliny said, what the Essenes said. So he's quoting them. And because, and this is at the time of Pliny that he's writing this. So you have to,
And this is Pliny the Elder, the first century Roman author, correct?
yeah. So that would predate the creation of Israel. Well, how could that be?
Hmm.
Unless it goes back to the Egyptian religion. That's the
Hmm.
only way it can be. And Josephus writes about the Essenes. And Josephus was a Pharisee. He was fully conversant with the Sadducees, and he lived amongst the Essenes. And he was part of the high priesthood, just as the Essenes had members on the high priest council at the Sanhedrin. And so he understood them, and he wrote about their belief systems, their very ascetic lifestyle. But the important thing that he wrote about is who they worshiped. And they worshiped fallen angels. And they would not give up the names of those angels even upon death and torture.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's where they say they received most of their knowledge from. So if they're responsible for writing some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, those are not monotheist doctrines. And if they're attributing, or if we're finding records of Judaic Torah and other books of the Old Testament, we need to look at those very closely because they could be being altered from that polytheist perspective. And one of the things that Essenes do, even to this day, Essenic groups in North America, and I've had some interesting interactions with them. And once you nail them down, they do throughout pretty much the whole New Testament. They do throughout most of the Old Testament. And again, Pliny and other historians that I have in that document, they testify to them not accepting large portions of the Old Testament. And yes, there's two groups of them. There's slightly difference in the nuances. I also, in that document, mention that there's two distinct groups, but they have that core belief with it's like a sect of each group. And so this is a polytheist group that had control of the temple at the fall of the temple, which is how they have another significant intersection with royal bloodlines and the secret societies and the Knights Templar.
Oh, I want you to expand on that, Brother Gary. But before you do, real quick, if someone's listening to this, they may not necessarily understand why secret societies are so bad in the first place, right? I just define this real quickly because what exactly are secret societies? What is their goal? Because, for example, when you look at Freemason literature, for instance, they seem very benevolent and good natured on the surface, but what's the ultimate goal behind the public facing facade?
Well, yeah. So what's going behind, like when you look at a Freemasonry organization, it has adepts at the top, and it starts at a third degree York Rite, the old mystical system, versus the Scottish Rite, which is 33rd degree. And everybody else below is just sort of camouflage. And they don't know the true secrets. They don't get told the true allegories. They're trying to rise up to a depth level, but they're not told the truth. They're just there to give them cover so that the secret organization can do their specific agenda. And they're part of a larger agenda as the lowest of what I call the trunk organizations as you go up this thelemic tree up to the 13 families at the top. And these are royal bloodlines that go back to patriarchal Nephilim and Rephaim kings, giant kings, and patriarchal, and in some case, matriarchal celestial mafia godfathers,
Right. Okay.
which
So
are fallen angels.
it's the
And they're
classic seed war, right?
It's a classic seed war, and their goal is to bring in the end time and to wipe humankind from the face of the earth so that we don't reach our destiny to be raised up to be like angels. The spiritu's offspring, the royales, were created to ensure that we would destroy ourselves from the face of the earth and lose our destiny. And so that the fallen angels would not get blood on their hands, because they know the power of the God Most High. So they use their spirit's offspring and their followers to do all the dirty work. So you'll not see a fallen angel disparage any of the heavenly ones or God or the Holy Spirit in a verbal kind of way. But what they will do is they will use their offspring to do it. So Antichrist would be a classic figure. Nimrod would be a classic figure for his, in other accounts other than the Bible, for his great speeches threatening God and things like that. So it's very important to understand that these are the visible ones on the earth that are acting on the authority and the divine right to rule in the top two nobility classes, as that right comes down through the Baalim Council at Mount Hermon.
Fascinating, Brother Gary. Well, so thank you for defining that for us, the secret societies, what they're all about, what they're up to. Obviously, it's a very detailed, in-depth answer. Again, guys, check out Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I believe every believer in Christ will benefit from reading that book. And honestly, I got to be honest, I've gone back and forth about your work, Gary, over the years, because I purchased your book many years ago now.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, there's a lot of information in here. I don't know, like some of it's so esoteric, like what's the practical value? But as I've matured in my faith, I've seen people go down so many different rabbit holes, and just the way that you lay things out, it's like armor. It's like, I don't know, that's one way of looking at it. It's like a defense, but it's also a way to like diagnose disease, spiritual disease. Like, oh, I can link that thought pattern or that false teaching to this group or that group. And I think that's where your work is so valuable. And I believe every believer would benefit from reading it. So, with that said, you mentioned the Essenes directly around the destruction of the temple, 70 AD. You said that they somehow position themselves to usurp power, spiritually speaking. Can you describe that? Because here's what I'll say. One thing I find interesting about the Essenes is that they're not mentioned in the New Testament, right? So in other words, they didn't go up to keep the 3 annual pilgrimage feasts, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. So they obviously they say they have high esteem for Moses, but they're like, yeah, we don't want to do anything with the temple or anything going up for the pilgrimage feasts. So what happened with them claiming ownership at a certain spiritual level? What happened?
Yeah, just so people know, we do get references in the Bible that I think is being spoken to the Essenes. The first one is an Old Testament reference in Ezekiel 8, where people are facing to the east for the rising of Tammuz and the sun. And that seems to be the Essenes. So you might want to read Ezekiel 8 for an Old Testament perspective. And this is a terrific abomination, right? That Ezekiel is discussing there. And then what we also have in the book of Colossians in the New Testament is Colossians 2. There's a set of ascetic laws that are being imposed on people, which are Essenic laws, all of them. And I detail them in the document that I have if people get a hold of me on this. And it's in conjunction with the context of not worshiping fallen angels. Right. And so I think those are two very clear passages that would sort of reference them, but they weren't considered separate from the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They seem to be what I would call, and we might understand this as a very good archetype of things today, that they were the mystical side of each.
Of the
And they
Pharisees
operate,
and Sadducees?
yes. And so even though the Sadducees and the Pharisees had some distinct positions, they had scenes that would sort of work back and forth, because this is a bloodline that comes down from Aaron, right? So they're just different sort of splits as you come down on that. And they have high seats at the Sanhedrin. So they have to be from that religion. And so if we look at Muslim or Islam today, and even though they've been pushed out, the Sufis with the Aga Khan as the leader, that is mystical Islam that has had significant influence through the royal families of Arabic nations over the millennia, that has influenced Muslim and Muslim thought process to even this day. And within Judaism, we have like the typical sort of orthodoxy of the Jewish people that would be more the monotheist variety. But when we talk about Kabbalism, that is Jewish mysticism. And that comes back with the people of Judea while they are in the exile of Babylon. So that comes back with them. Before that, there isn't any of this Lilith stuff that's in any of their thought process. This is all coming from the Mesopotamian. The Kabbalist is a sister branch of the Essenes, but from the Eastern mysticism that's begat by Nimrod and the Magi after Babel, versus the Egyptian mysticism that comes with Ham and Hermes to Egypt. And the Essenes represent that Western format, and they would be akin in the time of Jesus to the Alexandrian Gnostics. And then you have some other groups that are in the Middle East operating with the Essenes and the Kabbalists, which are like the Sabians and the Mendeans, and they are all different sects of this Judaic mysticism at that time. So now let's roll that forward. So we know that they had high seats at the Sanhedrin. After the Pharisees and the Sadducees flee, they're the only ones that are left in Jerusalem. So whatever secrets are there in terms of scrolls, treasures, genealogies, they're going to hide them, and they're going to have control for them. After the diaspora, they're going to move into Spain for the most part, the Essenes, and into southwest France. And this is going to be the epicenter for the start of groups like the Knights Templar. It's going to be the epicenter for the Cathars, for the Albigensians, and that they're going to take with them what they call the royal bloodline of David. That's going to be intermarrying with the European bloodlines. So when you get into the Da Vinci Code, then that's how they get Jesus as part of the Davidim bloodline, and the title of Davidim, as they would. Let me just back up, and I'll finish it. Then I'll come back and tell you how I got there. That they believe that Jesus did not die on the cross, right? And that they believe that he married Mary Magdalene, who had children and intermarried with and produced several children. One being Josephus, that intermarried with the English, Welsh, Camelot dynasties, and then through Aragon, who marries Amenabad of the Merovingian dynasty. That bloodline crosses over, and the Da Vinci Code is a fiction that's telling this belief system, which is typical fairy tale Gnostic type of literature. It's their MO of how they like to encode their history, their genealogies, their gods, and their belief system in kind of interesting narratives. And we see that in all things from Shakespeare to Tolkien and Lewis, so, and everything in between. So it's a common sort of practice that they do. So they adopt Jesus as being an Essene. They adopt John the Baptist as being an Essene. They adopt, when I say they, I'm talking about the Essenes adopt James the Just as an Essene. But they use the clever double entendre and allegorical meanings to make their case. But they don't want to deny Jesus as a great teacher or a prophet. They like to group him in their global polytheism or global Gnosticism, that I like to call it in book one, as part of the one sent on the way to help humankind to evolve into godhood. So they accept him as a prophet. They accept him as a great teacher, even with references that a lot of Gnostics will talk about is the teacher of righteousness is Jesus at that time. And the evil heretic is Paul, because Paul raises him to godhood. So they have to denounce Paul. It's just following their doctrine, things make sense, right? And so, but they will not accept them as the word of God. So they do. So when you hear the term Gnostic Christians, that's mystical Christians within the church. And we have a lot of Gnostics within Christianity in their churches, and they provide their symbolism in the churches that they dominate. And they don't just like to be members, they like to be the elders on the Protestant councils. And so we have Gnostics as being Essenic like within Judaism as a mystical group, and similar to the Sufis, and similar to I think those are, for the monotheist groups, that's sort of the three sort of contagions that are in monotheism that are always trying to move everyone to an interpretive polytheist approach to understanding scripture.
So, Brother Gary, going to, would you say that the Essenes are a direct byproduct of the Tower of Babel dispersion? Is that where we basically are saying that they originated from?
Well, that's where the religion originates. The Essenes are Jewish people, so we have to sort of look at the differences there. And I can't exactly tell you when the Egyptian religion becomes dominant in this group, but what we do see throughout Israelite history is this constant backsliding into polytheism. Typically, we get the accounts in the Bible of the Baalim backsliding, but the Ezekiel 8 one is distinct from that.
Right, the sun worshiping. And so,
Yeah.
would you say that that maybe originated under Solomon and his descent into Kabbalism and everything else?
Yeah, I think that was one of the times where you would have seen all sorts of religions being practiced. David and Solomon took wives from countries they did treaties with. And in terms of with Solomon, that led him away from God when he was older, and he put up all sorts of idols throughout the land to worship the various gods from the various wives that he married. And so I would think that would include Egypt, because they were doing treaties with them and receiving some land and working some military things, arrangements. So I think it's very likely that that's probably when it would have happened. And of course, that's at the start of the monarchy, too.
Right. So essentially, we can trace the mystical polytheism from Nimrod, Tower of Babel, down to Egypt, Heliopolis, then making its way to the second and third king of Israel, David and Solomon, respectively. Then transitioning forward in time, temple period, temples destroyed. We have the Essenes usurping high positions of power or maintaining high positions of power, although they are seen as an ascetic monastic cult that's separate.
Yes.
They usurped power.
Yep.
And you're saying that from the destruction of the temple, there's dispersion. We all know there's dispersion, especially the Jewish Roman wars and so forth. There's dispersion. You're saying they ended up in Spain, but you're saying the headquarters that eventually became the Knights Templar was in France, correct?
Yes. 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 And one other key ingredient is the carrying of the Davidic bloodline, and particularly the Davidic bloodline, although Saul's bloodline is also tracked within the scioning of royal bloodlines. And within that Davidic bloodline is the Despacini, which is the immediate family of Jesus, that they also adopt into their groups as well. And these are the ones that are also moving to, for the most part, to Europe. And again, we get historical records of the Despacini, and one of the ones I mentioned in book one is where they're petitioning the Pope in the time of Constantine to establish the Christian church in Jerusalem, where the original Jerusalem church was before the diaspora, instead of Rome. They don't win the argument, but they are powerful enough at that time and recognizable for who they are to be able to have a meeting with the Pope to try and make that case.
Fantastic, man. You have so much, you're such a wealth of knowledge, Gary Wayne. I mean, it's amazing. You don't have an honorary doctorate at this point. I said that in the intro. No one's given you an honorary
No,
doctorate.
No, I probably wouldn't accept it either. So.
well, well, it's the nature of the things that you explain is
Yeah,
probably the deterrence for anybody to
yeah,
probably want to give you a honorary doctorate, because it's like, this guy's too controversial. We can't have him.
yeah. Well, that's usually what happens. So.
uh, so transitioning,
Yeah.
how okay. We're in France. We have the Knights Templar. First, they set up the first central banking fiat system. There's a lot of things with the Templars. How do we get to the Freemasons? Because, as you know, I have it on screen here. Lodge Mother Kilwinning is said to be the oldest lodge of the Freemasons, headquartered in Scotland there, origins to the 12th century. Uh, Real quick, do you have any thoughts or comments on this lodge in particular?
Yeah, it's important to remember. So, when the Templars are set up, I mean, this is not the poor monks that everybody are told that they are. These are all royales. Um, so the main ones to keep in mind are de Payan, de Bouillon, and Anjou, as in the folk of Anjou. These are from the Anjou, they're all Anjou families from the Lorraine region of France. And so and there's also an important individual in there who's not listed in the original nine, but in the Masonic accounts, there's two other members where Anjou, Folk Anjou is a member who's going to become king of Jerusalem in 1118, Baldwin II. And the other one to keep in mind is a Saint Clair, a Henry de Saint Clair from the Normandy region. That's going to be the source name for the transliterated Sinclair name of Freemasonry in Scotland. And so what happens is that you have many royales involved, and they're the ones who are going to be the original formation of the Knights Templar in 1099. And they're also accompanied by what they call a council of barons in William of Tyres records and other records, and they nominate the kings for the king of Jerusalem. And they do it in a small priory of Sion. So the name that we know of it today is the priory of Sion. And then you have 6 months later a royal ceremony. So similar to what happens to King Charles III, where Queen Elizabeth dies, he gets crowned in a small private ceremony, and then he has the royal one in May, I think, of the following year, and he was crowned in October, if I'm reasonably close on the dates. But that's a tradition that goes right back to the time of the flood and the establishment of the kings, and even before the flood. It's an ancient hereditary right, and they're swearing an oath to a god, not the god,
Mm.
and it's got to do with genealogies from where they're from, who's giving them divine right to rule through the Council of Gods at Mount Hermon that we talked about by the Baalim Council. And so the Council of Barons are going to nominate de Bouillon as the first king of Jerusalem. He doesn't actually take the king title, but he's the ruler of Jerusalem. But his brother, who becomes Baldwin the First, de Bouillon from an Anjou branch, who is descended from the Merovingians,
Mhm.
right, that we talked about earlier, from the last survivor named Dagobert, is how the genealogy goes. And Baldwin the Second is going to die in 1118, or Baldwin the First dies, and then the folk of Anjou is named Baldwin the Second in a small priory on the rock of Sion, and then the royal ceremony 6 months later at the Abbey of Notre Dame down towards Bethlehem.
Mm.
Very important city in both Christianity and Gnosticism because of how they adopt Jesus into this, and they're going to be call themselves the kings of Jerusalem. Now, this is going to continue to 1188. And in 1187, that's the fall of Jerusalem. So the Knights Templar, one of the reasons for creating them was to make sure that they kept control of Jerusalem. They failed. And
Mm.
that's because they started banking and they were working as a secret society within the Roman Church. And uh, their goal was to create the new Babylon from the Ronsolen documents that I quote in the book, in book 1 and book 2. and that they want to create the new Babylon to bring about a world government and a world religion to present their Antichrist type figure. So this is the castle at Geezers, where you're going to have a ceremony called the Cutting of the Elm in 1188, and the Council of the Barons, the Priory of Sion, is furious at the junior order of the Knights Templar that Hugh de Paon becomes the first Grand Master of the junior order in 1118 as well. And then they get their papal bull starting in 1128, the Council of Troy, to take them on this long march to becoming the most powerful organization in Christian history and the most powerful bankers of all time. They actually created modern banking, but I'm digressing. So staying on track, they're going to have this ceremony at Geezer's Castle. Now, in Geezer's Castle, under the Geezers, this is where, when Antichrist makes his way in his grand entrance, Lord Maitreya, another name, there's a whole bunch of different names that they'll use, will go through the grand arch there to make his entrance in a secret ritual before starting his ascent to become Antichrist. So that's why they're interested in the bloodlines of the pedigree that also includes David, Jesus, allegedly, falsely, with the latter for sure, and with King Saul that I document in book 1. And so at the fall of the Knights Templar in 1307, the priory isn't there to help them. Why? Because they've split. And if you look at the list of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, it starts in 1188 with John de Geezer, right? And the second Grand Master is Marie de St. Clair, descendant of the St. Clair that was the hidden member of the Knights original 11, which we only get 9 named. And that the St. Clairs received their name with the expropriation of Normandy in 910 to 912 AD, depending on which historian you're talking about, where the Norse and the family of Rollo, the bloodline, the kings, they expropriate in wars against France, and the treaty is called the Treaty of St. Clair. So they adopt that name. So this is the royal bloodline of the Norse gods as they take their genealogy, and it's going to intermarry with all of these other bloodlines within France and England in process that they call ennobling or scioning of bloodlines to give them a higher level in the pedigree and where they fit in the overall royal hierarchy. And so with the fall of the Knights Templar, oh, and by the way, William of Tyre documents the Priory of Sion all the way through, and their organizations, and also the Catholic Encyclopedia get all this other information. There's 2 or 3 other authors I will use because the misinformation that becomes disinformation is out there that says it's a bogus group. But it's an ultra secret royal bloodline that they don't want public.
Which one, Gary? Which one? The St. Clairs?
The Priory of Sion
Priory of Sion.
So, and that's why I also put them in book 2, because I thought this is crazy, all of this, because I was being attacked, all these talking about a group that's a hoax, and it's like, no, that's all this information. So I put all of it in. I was quoting sources, and I knew their sources because I verified them before I used them. So I knew where to get the information to go directly to the historians of the time. So it's not hard to do, but most people don't do that. But I am a contrarian. I like to verify things myself. So
yeah, that's important.
It's important, yes, especially when you're in such controversial things. So with the fall of the Templars in 1307, many of them go to Scotland. Right.
Now we're getting to it. Now we're getting to the good stuff here, because this ties back into Qumran and everything else I wanted to bring up. So go ahead.
Under the protection of Robert the Bruce, who has been excommunicated from the throne at this point in time, so no obligation to the Vatican. And why was he excommunicated? Because he killed his rival in a Catholic church. They looked not too fondly on that, so they excommunicated him for doing that. And so he permits them to come in and puts them under the sponsorship of the Sinclairs. Now, many of the St. Clairs came across just before William the Conqueror, also a Norman, in that invasion. So they're already in place, and they're coming through with this complete sort of Normandy expropriation of Normandy and then getting control of England. And the de Bruce is actually a Norse bloodline from Rollo as well. So the St. Clairs are they're the ones who build Roslin Chapel, of infamy of Gnostic lore, in one of the pilgrimage sites. And that's another descendant of this Sinclair in the time of the original founding of the Knights Templar. So Robert the Bruce forms the order called Freemasonry for these adepts to have their own secret society and begin anew in England. And that's in 1317 where that order gets created. And then in 1323, he creates specifically for the senior order now, because they're developing lower level initiates underneath, their first visible Rosy Cross order. Rosy Cross order actually begins in 1188 at the cutting of the elm. This is the first visible manifestation of it in a group, and this is a group of royals. So we need to understand, these are all royals. Royals occupy, when we talk about the three top groups of the Slamic tree, you have the 13 families. Below them, the Council of 33 families. Below that, the Committee of 300 family, and then the Rosicrucians, where you get this intersections of the ones coming up through Freemasonry, Illuminati, into the lower levels of Rosicrucian. And at the top half of Rosicrucianism, you have the Royals as well.
I was going to ask you that. So Rosicrucian is the same thing as Rosy Cross?
Yes.
It's the same thing, right? You just pronounced it differently than I've heard it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you've got Rosicrucis, you've got many different variants, and it's all the same sort of group. And
let me pause real quick, Gary, and just verify. So I have actually one of these, because I know somebody who is the son of a very high level Mason. So in here, all this is verified, that you have all the whether it's the Scottish or York, right? You have all the degrees and so forth. And this is even debated, right? That they have their own quote unquote version of the Bible. They do. The Freemasons do.
And usually the KJV, because
this is a KJV. It's the Master Mason edition. I know it's backwards on the screen. But anyways,
there's an initiate KJV Bible, and then there's a Master Mason or an Adept one. And the Adept one typically has many more pages added into it, depending on the version of the Master Mason one that you have. And it gets really wild with all the extra information. But they look at putting the KJV into their larger Polychronicon, or as they would say, it comes out of their Polychronicon.
Okay, while we're on the topic, okay, I noticed that a lot of cults and secret societies like the King James Version. Is there a conspiracy with the King James Version that I'm not aware of, Brother Gary? What's going on?
Well, God can use, before I say anything else, God can use evil people to do things, right?
Amen. Amen. That's right.
And so we end up with an English version of the Bible. And but one of the things I've learned is to take everything back to the original Greek and the original Hebrew. So if I don't like what it says in the translation, I can verify things, right? So
right.
I know. So I just wanted to make that sort of clarification. So what happens is, in the time of Queen Elizabeth and James I, you have Rosicrucianism that is operating at very high levels, because the royals, they're part of the nobility. And so John Dee mentors Francis Bacon. Both are Rosicrucians. 007 comes from John Dee. if you take that secret service, and he did secret service type of stuff for Queen Elizabeth in Europe as kind of a spy. So that's just, but they put everything throughout their history and entertainment and allegories that only they kind of tend to know. But Francis Bacon was the second most powerful individual in the time of both Queen Elizabeth and then James after Queen Elizabeth dies. He starts two writing organizations. One's called the Knights of the Helmet, and the other one is the Spear Shaker Society, where Shakespeare probably comes from for the name. Spear Shaker is Athena and Apollo, who are Greek gods who sponsored arts and literature as part of their mythos. And they had a staff that they would shake, a spear shaker, and it was a powerful weapon of technology and stuff. So that's where that whole name comes from. And Bacon had created these two societies to write literature where the Shakespeare's tales come from, which has nothing but polytheism and genealogies of the royales in there. Again, that's their MO in terms of what they do. But Bacon was trying to create a new language for the new world empire that James would eventually want to bring about and sort of move into his kind of thoughts process. But it's Bacon who is putting these ideas into James as James comes to power, that we can start a new world empire that becomes the English Commonwealth, and they need a universal language to do so. And at this time of changing of kings and queens, you have significant disruption and angst going on with all of the various sects of Christianity. You have the Anglican Church that split away from the Roman Catholic Church. You have the Presbyterian Church coming down from Scotland. You have the Puritans, and you have multiple groups, and none of them are getting along, and all of them are dividing the empire. So what King James wants done is he wants a Bible done in an English translation to be a lot like what Constantine did, or Shapur of Persia of the Zoroastrians did. Is unite the empire, and he wants to do that to try and unify Christianity and do that through a common Bible. So it's as much a political move as it is a religious move. And what we're told in the history of this is that, and keep in mind, all of the translators are royals at this time, because the lower two class levels of humans don't get educated, right? So they're not the experts that are doing this. And so this what is said in Masonic history is that Bacon edited the final version, and in that we see some strange translations. And so what Hall has said, who is an adept of the late 1800s, early 1900s, Manly P. Hall. What he said is there are more Masonic markers than we can count in the KJV Bible.
Oh, wow.
Now it doesn't change the meaning significantly, but they just like to use that to see doubt in people that they have their hands in control on anything religion as part of their upper class. And they're going to use the KJV Bible and all Bibles against us in the end time, but particularly the KJV, because they'll be able to point to things, right? So
they just left a few fingerprints in there, basically.
Yeah, let's say like in Acts 12:4, where it has Easter.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a classic
translated
one.
from
Pascha.
Pascha, yeah,
Or
Pascha
Pascha.
for Passover, yeah. And people will say, well, that's because the Judeans had gone polytheist. Oh, I'm going, oh, is that right? Very few short years after the crucifixion, they're all polytheists, and they don't celebrate Passover anymore. They celebrate Easter. Are you sure you want to stand on that? Yes, we want to stand on that. Well, did you read 12:3? What do you mean? Well, what does it say in 12:3? I don't know. Well, let me tell you what it says in 12:3. This is how the conversations go. Similarly,
Uh,
I'm being a bit tongue in cheek. I said, why would they be celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread in 12:3, which follows immediately after Passover with a special Sabbath and starts a week if they were polytheist and they didn't celebrate the Passover.
right, yeah. And Brother
Uh,
Gary, real quick, I'm curious.
and
I've never, I don't.
Lucifer's the other one, though.
Oh,
That's the big one. I just
Isaiah
wanted to,
Isaiah 14.
yeah, see,
Yeah,
Lucifer,
Lucifer from the Latin,
yeah, it's a Latin word.
when it should be halal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Halel. Yeah,
Hmm.
the Hebrew is Halel ben Shakar, Halel, son of the morning, and Lucifer is an Italian word inserted into the English language for a Hebrew name,
Yeah, that's not a
right?
translation. That's not even a
Yeah, who
transliteration.
happens to be the god of the Freemasons, the Gnostics.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I know like people say they're Luciferian,
Yes.
but I just didn't think about it that way.
Yeah. So we don't transfer Michael, or Gabriel by the
Mm-hmm.
meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We just, because it's the name.
You just you translate or transliterate it. That's the
Yeah.
best way. Yeah. No, yeah. Lucifer. Yeah. I've always wondered about that. Thanks for adding some detail there. My goodness, that's good. By the way, I was going to ask you, do you observe Passover yourself personally, or?
Um, in a small way. I mean, always like to have lamb on Passover, and I
Right,
recognize
right,
the day.
right.
Um,
Very cool, Brother
so
Gary. Very cool.
yeah. So
Yeah.
just, I mean, I know we're not required to, but I think there's a spirit there that we should
Mm-hmm.
do
Mm-hmm.
so. So
Yeah.
so anyways, yeah. So that's how Bacon intersects, and the Rosicrucians would intersect with the KJV Bible, and why. And at that time, they wanted the Freemasons wanted to have a book they could swear oaths on.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. Yeah, because they're always
E-
putting their
Yeah, yeah,
hand on the Bible.
yeah. And in both the Old and New Testament, we're told not to take oaths.
So interesting, interesting. That's an interesting take. Well, so this takes us back full circle then. Okay, so we've established Freemasonry in Scotland. Robert the Bruce forms the Order of Freemasonry. A lot of
Yep,
former Templars, people from involved with St. Clair, they go specifically to Scotland. You have Mother Lodge Kilwinning. So here's how this ties in back into the Book of Enoch, because you have a guy named James Bruce of Kinnaird who brought the Book of First Enoch from Ethiopia to Europe in the late 1700s. And this is actually where modern academic study of the Book of Enoch actually comes from,
yeah,
because most people have this very confused, that the Book of Enoch was found. People say the Book of Enoch was found at the Qumran caves in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That is partially true. Yes, fragments were found, but they never had the complete book
yeah,
until James Bruce of Kinnaird acquired it. So I'm
yes.
curious what you have as far as thoughts and your research on James Bruce of Kinnaird.
Yeah, so I put a quick passing footnote about him in book one. I just thought it was interesting. Um, and it has a lot of connections that resonate through my book. Um, so I quote two Masonic historians who wrote a lot of books, and they would go lecture on the circuit in Masonic halls, teaching their people about their history. That comes out of the Polychronicon that I talked about earlier. And this is the soft cover I have. It's called Uriel's Machine. Uriel is also in the Book of Enoch. And the technology that was sort of passed on to the antediluvians and to Enoch, son of Cain, versus Enoch, son of Jared, whom they like to conflate with their Enoch as one of their patriarchs in the beginnings of their secret societies before the fall, before the flood, um, through Enoch as the major patriarch, son of Cain, of their. And so in this book, they talk about James Bruce, and I'm just going to read a couple of lines, and then I'll do a little bit of paraphrasing. But says his family were descended from Robert the Bruce, who we talked about, and had been involved with the Knights Templar and the beginnings of Scottish Freemasonry in the 15th century. He was a member of the lodge Canongate Kilwinning, at a lodge of Freemasons in Edinburgh. And then it goes on to talk about his travels to Ethiopia. But in a little few pages on, it's that he was not only part of the Templar bloodlines, but he was also descended from the high priests of the temple at the time of the fall of Jerusalem, which were the Essenes.
So James Bruce,
yes,
of Kinnaird, was directly a descendant of the Essenes according to their own literature.
Yes. And here's another one, just to throw another crumb out there for people. The Rothschilds also say they're descended from the Essenes.
Oh, wow. What's your source for that? I know you have sources for everything.
Yeah, it's in my book. I'd have to go look up I didn't prepare that one for the show, but I
That's
thought,
okay. That's okay.
Just thought I'd throw that out there, that they believe, they're descendants from the Essenes as well.
Okay. So again, see, this is where my mind is very blown by all of this, because when people think of the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation, they think of, oh, the Watchtower Society put that together. When people think of the Book of Mormon, they're like, oh yeah, Joseph Smith put that together.
Yeah.
But for some reason, when people think of the Book of First Enoch, they don't think, oh, James Bruce of Kinnaird is the Joseph Smith, or he's the guy that brought it from Africa. Like, he's the golden plates guy. Like he got, like, metaphorically making the connection to Joseph Smith. Like, he's the one that's like, hey, I got a new revelation here.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough people realize who had their fingerprints on this, the acquisition of it from Ethiopia. Here's my question. Why do you think the lodge, the Masons, would send James Bruce to acquire this document? What are they looking for with the Book of First Enoch?
Well, one of the things they do is they like to hide behind Enoch, son of Jared, so that they, in the history, they didn't want to be persecuted by the Roman Church. So they had to be very, very careful of what they were doing. And so this goes back a few hundred years. So the rivals were pretty vicious. Just look at the Albigensian Crusade, right? It was the Roman Church trying to wipe that and Catharism out of existence. Now, they would have done the same thing to the Roman Church, given the same opportunity, because you're not going to have two primary religions that are going to get along. And their ultimate goal is to have this mystical religion running the whole earth. So I'm not defending the Roman Church. I'm just saying that's how this world works. And so they want to be able to control all the information, and they like to put their markers into it. Now, we don't know what all the changes might be that they did. We can certainly get a few out of the Book of Enoch and believe me, I like the Book of Enoch a lot. I think it runs in everything it has very consistent with the Bible. There's a lot of what I would say suspicious stuff that's in there as well, with the prophetic side, that may be very much just added at a later point. But it does line up, so I'm not concerned about that. But things like, let's say, when you have the angels building the ark, that's a Gnostic belief system. And that's what the Giaz, or the Gies version, has in it. I have that one. I like that one.
Oh,
I have the shorter version as well.
You have the actual Giaz, like it's actually still.
No, I have the English version of the Gies. So
I thought maybe it was an interlinear or something like that. That's what I thought when you said that.
It would be good to have one of those, but I don't think they want to do that with some of the changes that they did. I'm not saying there's tons, but the ones that I noticed were two flagrant ones. Is that, and they have Enoch living to be 500 years old.
Exactly. Yeah, that's in. I have the reference for that. That's First Enoch chapter 60 verse 1, it says, in the year 500 in the 7th month and the 14th day of the month in the life of Enoch.
Yeah.
That's not a good look. It
That's not,
probably is
no.
talking about Enoch the evil, not Enoch of
Yes.
Jared, because that's
So,
yeah. Go ahead, brother Gary.
So there are various types of books of Enoch. First Enoch I like a lot. So I think they want to put their fingerprints on that to claim it and to conflate um, the other books as being, reliable as well, and kind of directionally talking about the same things. But when we look at the other books of Enoch, which is Second Enoch, sometimes called the Secrets of Enoch, depending on which collection that you're pulling those out. And then there's Third Enoch, and then there's the Book of Giants. And so we also have some Aramaic versions of the Book of Enoch that are a little bit shorter than the Ge'ez version. So again, they're trying to, make sure they got their fingerprints on everything and kind of claim it for themselves. But when you get into Second Enoch, Third Enoch, you have such wide variations into polytheism.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, any Christian looking at it should be just saying, okay, maybe interesting for some context, but can't use it for reliability. But you don't get that type of variation in Book Enoch. And we can also take a lot of the words kind of back to in First Enoch to Hebrew terms and words like sons of God, or for most Christians, when they're reading the Book of Enoch, they say, who are the Ophanim angels? And it's actually in the Bible. These are part of the 4 watcher groups that surround the throne in the Book of Enoch. So we get archangels. That's not an issue. We get seraphim. That's not an issue. We get cherubim, but Ophanim is a little bit different. These are the wheel angels in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10. So the concentric wheels that go round and round, it's going to be the Hebrew word Gilgal. These wheel angels have a face of a cherub on one of their 4 faces, so something distinct from the cherub. And that is the Hebrew word ophan for wheel, as in I am the wheel ones, or the wheel angels.
Mm-hmm.
So we can take some of those things back biblically, or like when Satan is in the Eden as a cherubim in Ezekiel 28, we get a name for one of his titles in the Book of Enoch named Gadrael. Halel is his morning star name. According to the mystic, Samael is his seraphic name, or seraphim name. And in Ezekiel 28, he's a cherubim, and we get Gadrael, which means wall of God, or God's wall, depending on how you want to translate that. And so because I'm a contrarian, I'm going, well, I know El is going to be in the Hebrew for an angel or a god. Can I get Gadra? And I just start to search for Gadra, and then you come across it, and then I found it in Strong's dictionary, and boom, okay, wall of God, got it. One of the names of Satan.
Well, so Gary, it's, when I investigate things, it's not necessarily the things that we have in common with the canon, right? The 66 books.
Yep.
But it's the differences that make the difference, right?
Yeah.
So Joseph Smith, any Latter-day Saint apologist will tell you, oh, there's a lot of parallels to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. But if you look deeply into it, well, there's a lot of plagiarisms of Isaiah that Joseph Smith did with Shakespearean English. So no doubt the writers of Enoch, First Enoch specifically, they had knowledge of the Hebrew tongue. No doubt they understood a lot of the mystical ideas and lore of the time frame, Second Temple, 300, 200 BC to the destruction of the temple. My question is this. The anachronisms are very interesting to me, but what about the solar calendar? What are your thoughts on the solar calendar and how that relates to the Essenes?
Yeah, so the most important book of the Essenes was the book of Jubilees, which is a book associated with Enochian mysticism and Enoch. And it's Enoch who introduces the solar system and the solar calendar. Now, biblically, it's important to know this because from an Israelite, from an Abrahamic, from a Noahite, from an Adamite, from a Sethite. They used the lunar calendar to follow God. But the solar understanding and the calendar that's going to be used that Jubilees focuses on is the one that becomes the way of the world, because it's what the Royals adopt. And it's Enoch, son of Cain, who develops the sun worshiping religion that also had the bull cult reflected in it before the flood. This becomes the universal polytheist religion. It's the religion of Atlantis and any other civilization you want to name before the flood, that took it to a level by developing, with the conjunction of the seven sacred sciences, as they call it, with the knowledge from the fallen angels or the gods. They developed the mystical religions, and from the mystical religions, they developed the mystery schools to develop these disciplines. Now, if we look forward, roll everything forward to today, to a university campus, we have a degree system with Beast Empire architecture all the way through, whether it's Babylon, Greek, Rome, Egypt. Everything in it is honoring the pantheon of the gods. Everything's named after that. And you have a ritual for graduation wearing black Cathar gowns.
Cathar, is that what they're called?
Cathar, yeah. And so, and you're doing all sorts of oaths and things. I mean, everything is the same way as it was sort of before in the beginning. It's just got sort of the modern influence. So we would know the seven sacred sciences as the seven liberal arts. Knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how it's used. But Enoch developed this knowledge and religion to lead people away from God, was priority number one. Priority number two is to not give God credit for anything, which is why God isn't permitted in universities today on any topic, and to slander God, and fourthly, to honor their pantheon of gods in every way. Those are the four goals of the mystical religion that I call Enochian mysticism, which is the same religion that develops at Babylon, which becomes the daughters of Babylon, that becomes a religion of Egypt that the Essenes take back or adopt into Israel, and also the Magi version through the Kabbalists. And this becomes Gnosticism as we would know it. It becomes all the mystical religions all around the world. And what people don't know is that the gods of the pantheon around the world are the same gods, just different vernacular names. So I'll use some post-Diluvian examples because people are maybe a little bit more familiar. I'll do a small reference to the antediluvian gods. We distinguish the two between parent gods ruling before the flood, offspring gods ruling after the flood. So Kronos is the father of Zeus in Greek mythology. Kronos rules before the flood, Zeus rules after the flood, because the parent gods went to the pit prison for the crimes. The offspring gods do the same thing. They disappear as well. In fact, in the Ugaritic text with Baal, they're trying to bring them back because they're, in some accounts, he died. In some places, they just don't know where he is in other accounts, but he's in the pit prison as well, along with the Baalim Council. So in the Canaanite pantheon, El is the parent god before the flood. Baal is the son of El and the head of the Baalim after the flood. Anu, Sumeria, Enki, and Enlil are the two famous ones. Ra, Osiris. Same thing goes for the Queen of Heavens as well as the mother goddesses. So if we sort of understand that, everything sort of starts to make some sense, and that this Enochian mysticism is going to be the mystical religion that's described as Babylon in Revelation 12. And note that Babylon goes back to the Hebrew root Babel.
Yeah, which what does that mean again?
Confusion of languages in Hebrew.
Confusion?
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, but I wasn't sure. Yeah.
But in Akkadian, it's Babalu, and it means, basically a portal or a stargate of the gods.
Oh, that's even more interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it?
especially with the discovery of what's going on in Giza these days with what's underneath and all the
Oh yeah.
legends and things about the pyramids. So,
Yeah.
so when we look at how this sort of kind of all relates to the Book of Jubilees, it's glorifying the mystical solar system, the sun worship system of polytheism. So now we have the most important book of the Essenes, who worship fallen angels, and they worship the version of Enoch, that's son of Cain, as their great patriarch, not the patriarch of Jared. And you have another connection to the Freemasons and secret societies.
Mm. Mm. I have a few questions for you, Gary. I have a few questions. First, let me show you a really good article um, from, again, so we talked about the 500-year, the problem with the Book of Enoch saying that Enoch was 500 years old
Yep.
when the real Enoch was taken at 365.
Yeah.
And Moses and Elijah were at the mount where the transfiguration happened in the Gospels, but they don't have an age. Like, that's kind of just an extra biblical concept. Once they're gone, Moses' body was taken, Elijah was taken up by a whirlwind. Enoch was not. Technically, they're in eternity. We stopped counting the number of their years. So I thought that was very suspicious for me personally about the book of First Enoch really not
Yep.
being about the good Enoch, but being about Cain's son. There's also another little bit of a issue that I see with Enoch when we go to chapter 71. So this is from David Wilbur. He's interesting. He has a very interesting blog, very interesting take on the book of Enoch. He says that basically at the very end of the book of parables, the third book of parables, it says, "You are that son of man who was born for righteousness," and it actually makes Enoch the savior of the world, not Jesus.
Yeah, you're talking about third Enoch here, correct?
No, First Enoch chapter 71 verses
Oh,
13 through 14. The
I will
issue,
have to have a closer look at that, because
I
third Enoch raises Enoch to be son of God status and changes his name to be Metatron.
right, Metatron, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so the name of this article is "Who is the Son of Man" in First Enoch
Yep.
71:14, David
Yep.
Wilbur, just for the source there. But what he pointed my attention to
Yep.
is that what a lot of translations of First Enoch have done is they've said,
Yep.
"This is the Son of Man." So, but that's a minority reading based off of
Yep.
one translator's bias of it. He talks about these things in here. It's actually R.H. Charles who wanted to change it to say, "This is the Son of Man," to fit his theology. But the Ethiopic is literally saying, "Enoch, you are the Son of Man." That's going to basically be the one that's going to bring
Right.
righteousness into the world. I was wondering if you had come across that. I know that's for me, when I saw that, I was like, "Oh no!" Like, I
No.
gotta look. This was the red flag on top of the
Yeah.
500-year-old Enoch
Yeah,
thing.
I have a document on First Enoch, and I didn't want to go and list all of them, but I did not see that one. So I wrote the 71:14 down, and I'll have a good look at that later. But those would be the types of Masonic markers that they would do.
Mm,
So it doesn't technically change your understanding a lot as somebody who isn't an adept. Just as if you read Acts 12:4, Easter, they've brainwashed us to accept Easter as the celebration instead of Passover, and even on a separate date. So people don't think anything about it. But you got to know they're just laughing their heads off about that over, for the last, since the translation came out, or how they got the God of their belief system into the Bible.
whew. Yeah, so that's a fingerprint there. You have a guy
Yep.
named R.H. Charles putting his own bias into it, but the
Yep.
original Ethiopic is saying that Enoch is the Metatron, just like it does in the other books.
Yeah.
The transfigured angel, savior, godlike deity, basically.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't know if you have anything to add on that before, because I have
Well,
other
I
questions.
would just say, so people would say, well, so what? Well, okay. So when if you're doing research or you're talking to people who are working on AI and algorithms and high-tech technology, these are scientists that are involved in a lot of cases because they come out of the seven sciences, mysticism. They're in contact with the spirit realm, and they're being mentored by Metatron and giving knowledge by Metatron. If you want to look at terms that we use today, let's say with the superheroes, which is just an allegory for giants in early after the flood and before the flood, you have the metaverses. Where do you think they got that from? In DC Comics, District of Columbia, that talks about superheroes, and in second Enoch, they call these giants these marvelous ones, and Marvel Comics.
Marvel Comics.
It's all over everything they do. If you can just sort of pick up on how do they come up with these names? How do they come up with their logos? Paramount has 23 stars. Typically, that's understood to be, the 23 in the Book of Enoch that are listed together.
And
that mountain is Mount Hermon.
You have a DNA company called 23andMe that just went bankrupt, and then they're going to sell all the Americans' genetic DNA to the Chinese or whoever the highest bidder is.
23andMe genealogies of the fallen angels, right? So that they can track all of their ones who have their genes. And the genealogical tree is another form of the thalamic tree. And it's the elm, oak, and ash tree of Mount Hermon. Oak, obviously, as people are familiar with that through the Tuatha De Danann and the Druid religion. They would use an oak, an elm, or an ash tree as the most sacred tree in their religion, also allegorical for the world tree. But also in 1188, that was the cutting of the elm, cutting of the genealogical connection and authority to the Knights Templar with the split.
That's so profound. It went over my head, Gary. I got to think about that one some more.
Well, and in the secret societies, that's the other thalamic tree, and that's a great cedar of Mount Hermon, and the branches come down. So trunk organizations have all these branches that intersect into the trunk organization. And that's how you start to understand such complex organizational structures. So understand the trunk organizations that I named earlier. So let's say you have Skull and Bones, for example. They're going to be a trunk organization that operates, a branch organization that goes into the Illuminati level of the trunk. And they're going to have branches all over in the Ivy League and probably even elsewhere on the university campuses, where secret societies took their beginnings from the mystery schools to form these types of secret societies that we know of the modern ones today, that are mostly due to the split of the Knights Templar to decentralize that organization after that fall. So if you understand the trunk and you understand the cedar allegory, and that these are the cedars that are compared to, and the oaks that are the strength of the giants, or according, at least the Amorite giants, the hybrids, and as tall as the cedars. So these are very important allegories on Mount Hermon, which is where the Council of the Gods are. And also, this is these roots of these trees, they go into the earth where their gods reign from, in Sheol or Hades. And the genealogical tree would come up from those roots from a specific god as you take that full understanding. So they call these genses that they fall into. So you have one called the LB gens that I talk about in book 1. And that is one that like you would go through for the Norse bloodline of the LB gens and the Tuatha De Danann in England. So you could infer that that would be more of a Windsor or a Hanover gens. You have another gens that is called the Julia gens, which is part of the black nobility of Italy, that goes back to, and there's also a Fabia gens, and trying to remember the other one. It might be a Claudia gens. But anyways, those, they go back to the original 100 senator families who are the descendants of Romulus and Remus, from the god as it would be understood in a Roman pantheon named Mars, and in the Greek pantheon Ares. So they have that genealogy that goes all the way back. One more just on the genses, and there's lots of these genses around the world. You have the Creta gens, that derives from the word Crete. And Zeus spends a lot of time on Crete, and this is his gens. And he produces Hercules through the human female Alcmene to produce the Herculidean kings, which have the Creta gens.
Yeah.
So the
Go ahead.
the Albigens would go back to Albion as one of the giants. Also associated with Albion in England is Gog and Magog. These are antediluvian name for giants. They also have postdiluvian giants of the same name, and that's not uncommon to have postdiluvian giants named after antediluvian giants. But it's important to understand this, that this is a Nephilim versus Rephaim genealogy, and that this goes back to a Greek god that's a parent god named Iapetus. And that's the genealogy for the Albigens. Now, Poseidon is an offspring god, and he inherits the mythos and the authority after the flood for everything associated with Iapetus. So technically, the Atlantean kings, depending on which Poseidon mythos or Iapetus mythos that you're going to take it back through, you're going to get two different gods producing the same 10 sets of kings and very similar sort of names to the daughters that they marry. Iapetus marries Clymene, and Poseidon marries Clyto. So probably the same root and exactly the same story. Why? Because Poseidon inherits the mythos just as Zeus inherits Cronus's mythos, just as Baal inherits El's mythos.
Yeah, when you say mythos, you just mean all the lore, attributes, worship systems, and all that?
Yep. Yeah, that is transgenerational.
Okay.
And still going today. So.
Yeah, okay. Well, you're throwing a lot at me, Gary. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. Again, thank you for hanging out with me. I actually, this was only supposed to be a short conversation. We weren't even supposed to have this conversation. You were booked
Yep.
out months and
Yep.
months and months out, but thank you for making this time slot available for us to have a discussion here. I've been blessed.
Well,
But go ahead.
I think we should probably finish on just the word Nazarene, a Nazarite.
Well, I do have one other question for you.
Yeah.
Actually, there's like two other things.
Yeah. Okay.
And yes, I do want you to talk about that as well, because I think it's very important when we're talking about disinformation, misinformation. What I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more about James Bruce,
Yep. Yep.
the Joseph Smith of the Book of First Enoch.
Yep.
He wrote a book entitled Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile. It's 5 volumes of his travels that took place over 6 years, in which he acquired the Book of First Enoch, but he also acquired the Kebra Nagast,
Yep.
which is the history book that documents, and historians are like, this isn't a verifiable true account, but it documents the legend of Solomon marrying Bathsheba, or not Bathsheba, I'm sorry, Solomon and Queen of Sheba. Different, yeah. Queen of Sheba and Solomon have the first emperor of Ethiopia. That's their son. And then there's this big old legend. The Ark of the Covenant was taken to Ethiopia, and there's all this lore in the Kebra Nagast. So James Bruce also brought that book with the first book of First Enoch back with him to Europe. He was the one that introduced that literature. And what he says here, I want to pull this up. He says, to the King George III, who paid for his travels for 6 years, which is a very interesting time because they're at war and so forth. he specifically refers to it as a golden age. Can you, because we're hearing this term a lot now, and so he refers to this era where he discovered these books in Ethiopia, his travels and so forth, as a golden age. Can you talk about what they mean by this?
Well, the Golden Age is typically understood as an antediluvian period. And the Golden Age was when the gods walked amongst us. Everything was aplenty. Knowledge was exploding. Giants were created. And a golden age is a new golden age that people like to talk about when they're trying to bring about the new Atlantis, which is a Rosicrucian Francis Bacon concept. Yeah, where Atlantis was the greatest civilization of the antediluvian world. It was the center of Enochian mysticism or black magic. It was a highly technically advanced civilization, and they were trying to create, with this empire of these 10 kings, a world government with a universal religion. And they probably would have destroyed the earth by fire, which was their goal as creations, to destroy humankind from the face of the earth. But it was not permitted, and God interceded with the flood. What's interesting in the Gnostic sort of lore, just as a interesting sort of anecdote, is that this knowledge of that they had collected was put into 36,525 books, put under the Great Pyramid in 9 vaults stacked on top of each other, that Hermes finds and takes the knowledge back to Nimrod. But the directions to that and whatever other information was on those pillars were put on 2 different types of pillars. One was designed to survive the destruction of fire. The other one was designed to float or survive a flood, because they didn't know which destruction was coming. That's from a Gnostic account. And the reason why that's done is because the destruction by fire that's talked about in 2 Peter 3 has this reference to, in the beginning, with this destruction of fire, that where the planet perished, the earth that was in the water, out of the water, perished. And in the flood, the earth didn't perish. Only the land animals perished. The whole world didn't perish. And that this destruction of fire is reserved for the end time. So this is the age, that of a golden age, the first time when gods walked amongst us, giants walked amongst us, and the earth was almost destroyed, seemingly like it was between Genesis 1 and 2, but God interceded to prevent that. And because that's reserved for the end time. So when people like James Bruce, or perhaps President Trump, thinking that he might have some knowledge on this, is talking about a golden age, they're trying to bring about an age with this same universal religion that is talked about in the end time, with 10 kings as they're numbered in Daniel 2 on toes, as they're numbered as horns in Daniel 7. And as you get the same image of these beast empires that rise out of the sea, the Gentile nations, in both Daniel 7 and in Revelation 13, and you arrive at this 10 king empire of the end time in Daniel, or in Revelation 12, 13, and 17. This is what they're talking about, this golden age. And we are advancing in knowledge like what happened before the flood. And people will say, well, you have nothing that you can prove or suggest that there was this knowledge, except that we have all of this polytheist history before the flood that would suggest that. But biblically is the important thing. So when we look at the violence that is attributed to the flood, and understand the giant creation story is the preamble and the context for why the flood comes. It's in Genesis 6:1-4. We get reintroduced to Noah and his sons and their commission. And then comes the flood in Genesis 6 and 7. So when we look at that violence, and now we look at Enoch, first Enoch, we're told is Azazel, who's the leader of the Watchers,
Mm-hmm.
who is put into the pit prison for those crimes. He's the one who teaches all the arts and crafts of war to the people of the earth. So we think of that as swords and things like that, but they have great technology, and I'll come back to that in a second with an example. But this is knowledge that comes from the angels. It's angelic technology, just as people saying they're receiving knowledge to develop the advanced technology today that is being provided that could and did, I think, based on what God permitted to happen with the flood and the reference in 2 Peter 3, that they had the ability to destroy the earth because they had that angelic technology. And today, nuclear weapons can do it, but I think if you're going to do it quickly, you'd have to do it with even greater weapons. So we're maybe still developing that level of weapons. And the whole earth was corrupted, and all flesh was corrupted. That's the Hebrew word shakath. That means to pervert, to ruin, to decay, to destroy. But all words, it's cause and effect, right? They're adding something to it. So they're destroying all of the flesh. They're perverting all the flesh and all the earth. It's
Mm-hmm.
both. And that means all the plant genomes and all of the DNA. Just as we have chimera technology that's DNA manipulation today, and we know all of the moderations that's going on with plants around there today. So God calls all the animals to the ark because he knows which ones aren't perverted. Which is why he selects certain ones to reproduce the species, which is a kind, as it's understood, as you take that back. So it's not every animal, it's every kind, as it's understood in the Hebrew. So
That's key. Yeah, I love how
that's
you said
key.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so again, the translation is not as good as we would like it, and it brings in all this doubt and wedges faith because logically you can't put all representatives, all different varieties of animals on one ark, right? So it's got to be a
Right.
bullshit BS story. So,
Mm-hmm.
and so when we look at the technology that was going on there, it is designed to destroy humankind from the face of the planet so that we can't be raised up to be like gods and to be like, I mean, like angels, and to judge those angels in the future time. So when we look at this golden age that they're talking about, when they talk about world government, when they talk about AI and all of this knowledge, this is what happened before the flood. And we get a reference in Jesus's chronology of the major signs of the end time. And part of the overarching signs are the days of Noah. It's going to be like the days of Noah. And it's not just being godless, and it's not just violence. It's violence to the level that would have destroyed the earth.
Right.
And we need to look at all of the references in the New Testament when it refers to Sodom and Gomorrah or the time of the flood for that type of destruction, just as Luke has the days of Noah and the destruction of Sodom as a transitional apocalypse example as being like the days of Noah, but also like the days of Lot, which was destroyed by fire, which is the end time destruction. It's just completes Mark's and Matthew's account on it with those specific details. So that's why we get this end time destruction like the Sodom and Gomorrah allegories in end time prophecy, because the Bible just works that way and it's kind of in its perfection. So this is a reference that we need to understand what it was like before the flood to understand what's going on today. And if people don't want to sort of accept that, I get it. But I would also encourage people to read Ecclesiastics 1, where it talks about nothing is new under the sun.
Mm.
What was will be again. And as you get on to about passage 17, it says the understanding of this knowledge only brings grief and sorrow.
Mm. Yeah.
Recycling, because that's what they do all the time. Each beast empire was trying to bring about the end time,
Mm-hmm.
just as the last beast empire will.
And so, okay. Thank you for explaining that golden age. I'm curious what you think about articles like this that are coming out. This is just from a couple days ago, 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Declassified CIA files reveal psychic quest for the Ark of the Covenant. This is from the Jerusalem Post. And if you take a look, this has been going on for a while. It's called Project Sunstreak, remote viewing exercises to find the Ark of the Covenant. And, I'm not going to take the time to go through these psychoenergetic, psychokinesis, telepathy, remote viewing documents and procedures of basically witchcraft, but they're just calling it science. How does that? Why do they care so much about the Ark of the Covenant in particular? Any thoughts on that? And why are we hearing about it now?
Well, when Antichrist comes to power, he is going to be replacing Jesus as the true Redeemer and have his throne on earth. And Satan's going to be the God, right? Not the God most high. They're going to counterfeit everything. So if you're going to counterfeit everything, they probably are going to have an Ark of the Covenant, a counterfeit Ark of the Covenant. And you can build counterfeits because you get the instructions in the Bible. Whether or not they work to the same degree or not,
Well,
I
yeah,
don't know, but
you've seen Donald Trump's at Mar-a-Lago. It was at Mar-a-Lago.
I
Now
have.
it's in Jerusalem. Yeah.
I have. So expect that to be part of it. Biblically, we don't know what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. In the book of Maccabees, they have Jeremiah bearing it under a mountain. Biblically, we get the Ark of Covenant shown or in the throne of God in the end time. So I think that's what they're focusing on, is that, so that if we're going to deceive the whole world and the elect, if that were possible, and it will be because Bible says it's going to happen, one should expect antichrist and antichrist wannabes will have a counterfeit Ark of the Covenant, and expect that maybe things will happen through this with demons or fallen angels to produce things, because it's a communication vehicle. It was like an oikotarian for Jehovah to communicate in the temple. And oikotarian is the Hebrew word that means dwelling, the Greek word that means a dwelling place for the spirit in the New Testament.
Hmm.
And so um, when the angels left their habitation in Jude 1:6, habitation is the Greek word oikotarian. They left their dwelling place for their spirit in heaven. And if they wanted to interact physically, they could be here as a spirit. But if they wanted to interact physically, they have to create a new oikotarian. And when they did that, created the ability to create offspring and pass genes on. And they can take any form that they want. And people say, well, they're spirit beings. They can't take a form. Read Hebrews 13, be nice to strangers, lest you run across an angel. Read the Sodom and Gomorrah account where you got two physical angels and Jehovah taking a physical form, eating, drinking, touching, doing everything sort of earthly. They're called men. In fact, Abraham doesn't recognize them as angels at the beginning. So they can be known or unknown, because by the time they get to Sodom and Gomorrah, they already know they're angels, even
Mm.
though they're in
Mm.
human form, and they want to have sex with them. But that's a different rabbit hole.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's a that's a rabbit hole, right?
so, but just to sort of make those kinds of connections. So in 2 Corinthians 5:2, the house in heaven that we long for, because we have a house on earth today, that house in heaven is oikotarian, dwelling place for our spirit in heaven. So it's an important concept to understand how things work in the Bible from a preternatural basis. So what it's telling us is that this ark can be an oikotarian for a spirit,
But obviously
not
not
necessarily God.
not the Ruach Hakodesh, not the Holy
Yeah,
Spirit.
yeah,
Probably something else, right? Especially because
yes,
it's a idol. I mean, it's idolatry to make something like that outside of God's instructions.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they all want to be able to create a teraphim, a talking idol,
Mm.
and the ultimate teraphim is going to be the image of the beast.
Mm. Mm.
So probably even more technology involved there as well. But if you're an antichrist wannabe, you're going to create your own mythos, right? So they'll probably try and use that and maybe some technology, but it won't be on the scale of the mark of the beast image.
Fascinating, Gary. Well, so uh someone might have listened to this whole conversation, be like, you know what? I think the Essenes are still good people. I think we
Yeah.
should look for our theology from the Qumran caves. I think, the Enochian solar calendar's not a bad thing. You know, it's just, I don't know if I believe it or buy into it. Do you want to break down some of the what Natsar means? Because that's how they refer to themselves. The
Yes.
Essenes refer to themselves as Natsar or Nazarim, right?
Yep, they do. And what they do with that is that double entendre and transliteration thing that they like to do in polytheism, another mark of polytheism. So we already talked about they have these very ascetic Nazarite eating habits. So we have Nazarite in the Old Testament. That's part of what they adopt into this new sort of ideology. They also adapt Jesus as a Nazareth, as a Nazarene, as part of that same image. And so when we look at the word Natsar, that's where the true meaning that they use comes from. That's the Hebrew word for Natsar. And then they overlay that as being the same in various forms of words of that, as being, a Nazarite, Nazareth, and things like that. So Natsar means basically, a guardian of knowledge, right? And that's the bank of knowledge from the fallen angels
Hmm.
that they received, and that they were continuing to receive that knowledge, which is why they would protect the names of those angels even upon death. They're not loyal angels that are doing this. These are the fallen angels, the ones that weren't in sent to the pit prison. So we would understand that in the same imagery as Azazel hung upside down in Roslyn Chapel with a rope in the form of an S or a Z, trailing him and wearing the pearls of wisdom. That's an allegory like the golden apples or the gold or the archives of the Masons, or the emerald tablet, or the thousand different allegories throughout history, the Shatia in Jewish mysticism, that holds all the knowledge that ever was or ever will be. That's the knowledge that they are guarding as part of the inheritors of this ancient knowledge. Everything about them is polytheistic.
Hmm. Hmm. I think the important and key distinction to make here is that when the Essenes refer to themselves as Natsar or Natsarim, they're talking about preserving the secrets of the fallen, but there is it's an ideological distinction, whereas Jesus was from Nazareth, which is
Yes.
a geographical distinction. So there's
Yeah.
this geographical identity and this like hijacked ideological identity, and they've become conflated in most people's theology, right, Gary?
Yes. Absolutely. Now, let me throw out a couple other things here that people may know about or may not know about the Essenes. You have to be chosen to join their order. You just don't join. Where is that common? Secret societies. You can't join a secret society unless you're chosen, and they do that through genealogies for obvious reasons. You would have to swear an oath and have initiation, and still do today with the Essenes. That's mysticism. That's what secret societies do. Um, they taught knowledge from their ancestors, and they like to try and communicate with their ancestors. That's what they do in Rosicrucianism, and it's mysticism. They had secret signs to recognize each other. Um, so they could communicate, say, hey, I'm of this order. They had secret handshakes that they did the same thing, just as the Masons had. They had temples and monasteries to practice their rites and their religion, and it's these secluded monasteries. This Essenes are the first Western branch of the ascetic monasteries of Hinduism, which is Zoroastrianism, and in the religion of Babel and the giants. And those monastic orders were exported into the Roman Catholic Church, into the Gnostic orders. Whether or not it's the Cistercians, which were part of, they had two members on the original nine of the Knights Templar, but these are all royales because it was only the nobility, which goes back to the Indo-Aryan word for its meaning, for the noble ones, as Aryan is made, and these are Indo-Aryans, Indo-Europeans are giants. These are the bloodlines of the giants. And it was only the elite, you might as well call them Elim
Mm.
instead of elite.
Yeah. A meme, Zemzumim, you're referring to those
Yeah,
giant, yeah,
yeah, because I am is the plural for angels and their offspring, and the
right.
majestic bloodline, as it was understood in antiquity. Um, and so they're the ones who control the religions throughout our whole time because they're the only ones that were educated.
Mm.
And so um, we need to understand the context and how we swim in all of their imagery. They just know we don't know anything, but understand they were a monastic order, like the Gnostic orders we see today, or like the Buddhist monks. It's the same ancient organizational structure. Um, so those are just a few that say um, that show that there's a connection, and they actually inside the craft take part of their organizational structure back to the Essenes. The other part goes back to the assassins that they
Hmm.
brought over to Europe for all the organizational structure in Europe. And the assassins is the Sufi part of mystical Islam that we talked about earlier. And the assassins worked in conjunction and partnership with the Templars for at least 100 years while they were in the Covenant land.
So basically, what we can say is obviously the Qumran caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was a significant archaeological discovery. It was
Yep.
beneficial in many different ways. We have the Dead Sea, the Great Scroll of Isaiah. We have other things to help us understand the time period.
Yep.
But basically, don't get your theology from there. Stick to the canon. What would you say, Gary? That's what I would say.
Always stick to the Bible. Everything you read outside the Bible, you measure against what's in the Bible. And if it varies, as in being contradictory, then you can't use it. But if it adds more context in the same direction, you can use it with more reliability. But be very careful to how you read, whether it's polytheist or apocryphal. Um, it has to be perfect with the Bible before you can use it for your basis as a Christian for sound doctrine.
Amen, brother. I agree with that 100%. I love all the Bible references that you include in your work and the things that you've kind of exposited here on this interview. I appreciate it, man. When you go into exegesis, you do a fabulous job. Again, I can't recommend your work more. I recommend it a ton. Like I can't stress how important Gary Wayne's work is for navigating the ocean of deception that we find ourselves in these days, and it's only going to get a little crazier with AI and all the stuff that they're trying to do with the golden age, which thank you for decoding that for me.
Yep.
That was extremely important. Anything else before we finish off, Gary? I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered most of the things off. Like I say, like if you want to know more about these scenes from a more historical, biblical perspective, I've got a document on that. If you want to know everything about what the polytheists think about the Essenes and how they adopt them in, that's in book one, and it goes like throughout the book. It's just a massive amount. So you just can't sort of make a separation between them. It's like a seamless part of the passing on of this knowledge in preparation for the end time. And understand these scenes are apocalyptic. And what a lot of Christians don't know is that every form of polytheism is apocalyptic as well. They just have a different outcome. And why it's relevant is we are in their age of Aquarius that brings destruction by fire starting
Mm.
in 2012, and it happens early on. So if we are in the fig tree generation, and I think we might be, then we should be paying attention to it, because it's not just going to be the apocalyptic zealots of Christianity, as we will be called and are called, that are talking about the end time, but they want to bring this rendezvous with destiny and have the showdown with God.
Well, with that said, guys, put your faith, trust, and hope in Jesus Christ. He is right here with his arms open saying, please let me love you. I'm going to forgive you of your sins, but you got to confess them first. You got to repent. You got to turn away from your wickedness, okay? Breaking the law, breaking God's commandments. We've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior and experience radical freedom and transformation. That's happened to me. That's happened to Gary. That's happened to all of us who are followers of Christ. He is not a liar. His word does not return void. He stays true to his promises, and he's ready to give you living water so that you may not thirst. Thank you, Brother Gary, for being here with us. God bless you. I know you're a busy man, but I would love to have you on again. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. This was a great topic, though.
Terrific. Yeah, anytime.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it again, Gary. Thank you so much. God bless. Hey, thanks for checking out this deep dive into the book of 1st Enoch with Gary Wayne. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed putting it all together for you. And if you want to see more content like this, consider supporting the channel here at buymeacoffee.com. There's a link down below. It really helps to put together more high quality content and bring more guests and bring cutting edge information that you're not going to find anywhere else. God bless you. I'm your brother Abraham, and I'll see you on the next one.